From across time and space and throughout the multiverse, listen as two generations of comic book readers come together to discuss a single character or event that shaped pop culture as we know it. Let Your Geek Sideshow presents Then and Now with Susan and Kitty. Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Susan.
And I'm Kitty.
And today we are suiting up to talk about a superhero who has made quite a mark on film in the last decade.
I think he's made like 50 marks.
Isn't he? Didn't he peak at 50?
I think so.
Anyway, we'll get into that later. He's a genius, billionaire, playboy philanthropist, and when you take off the suit, he's one of the biggest stars in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Through 10 years of Marvel milestones, this is MCU Iron Man, then and now. We have to be specific because May 2nd was a huge day for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that marked the day that the first Iron Man film was released, and
10 years ago.
That's 10 years ago. It's a huge like milestone for Marvel in general, but the MCU specifically. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to talk about specifically Iron Man in the movies because it's such a different monster than Iron Man in the comics. And obviously we would love to address that at some point and have a separate podcast, but for this one, it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe Iron Man.
Yeah, and while we talk about that, we will talk a little bit about how the cinematic universe has evolved to include more storylines for these characters and more interactions and stuff, because you can't really talk about the film that launched the MCU without then talking about the 10 years that followed.
Absolutely. And I would also say that you can't talk about the MCU without talking about a few characters and storylines that inspired it from the comics, because, you know, you talk about Marvel and we're talking about, what, 60 years-ish? 70 years? I don't remember.
Of comics?
Of comics.
Oh, over 70.
Over 70. Because, you know, the MCU wouldn't have happened without that content in general. So,
yeah.
But I want to point out that, like, how cool is it that there are 10 years of Marvel movies?
I know.
Like, there's enough that we can talk then and now and the evolution of a character only in film that originated in comic books.
Oh my God, it's incredible. And the one thing I always kick myself about is I wish I could go back in time and tell myself, hey, when you see Iron Man opening weekend, pay a little more attention because you're going to be here for the next 10 years and beyond.
I just remember, because I'm going to be honest, Iron Man was never a character that I liked. To put it very, very bluntly, you know, I went and saw the movie mostly because I was like, are they going to pull this off? And I remember leaving that theater just being like, holy moly, they did. I actually said an expletive, but this is
a family-friendly podcast.
This is an all-ages podcast. But what I mean is, like, Iron Man to me at best was like, you know, part of a team. I know that he had obviously his own comics throughout the years, but I personally never thought of him as like a main character, and especially not one that could like open a blockbuster movie. Like during
and that movie still holds up.
Oh my God, that movie's still amazing. Leading up to Infinity War, I did like not a full, because there's like 18 other movies, but I did as best that I could, but I did want to start with Iron Man, because when you're talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you have to start with Iron Man.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that movie's still relevant and it still holds up. And it's crazy to sit there and watch Tony Stark because he's almost like a different character.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with all the different media that Marvel has put out and the longer form shows and the movies, how quickly and also not quickly, because they've had 10 years, they have to do these character developments and changes, because you only see them, like the Avengers, you only see them for 2 hours at a time in whatever film they're appearing in. And so it's fascinating to watch how the films have taken these gargantuan, like, the storylines from Marvel that people recognize, or at least adaptations of them, and then progressed the film characters through those stories.
It's so cool. I mean, I'm sure we're going to touch on other characters besides just Iron Man, because while we're labeling it Iron Man, there's just so many other characters. But like for me, we're talking then, right? I'm always the beginning. because we don't want to talk about how old Kitty actually was when Iron Man came out.
I could date myself.
No, we don't date ourselves on this podcast because then I have to.
I was a wee thing when I saw the film.
I'm still in awe of what they did. This film where they somehow hit a bullseye on the first try with Robert Downey Jr. having this amazingly deep and memorable and emotional performance as Tony Stark. He really took Tony Stark to a different level. He brought him to life in a way that 60 years of comics didn't or hadn't, to me anyway. I never was able to see the emotional weight of things that Tony went through the way that I have in the past 10 years. So when he starts, he's making weapons and he doesn't see the consequences of that because he sees himself as like what other people see. He's almost become Tony Stark in the beginning was almost the caricature of himself. He was what everybody else thought he should be instead of who he really is. And that is such a reversal of what you normally see. Like you normally see a character build up and then fall down. And Tony, when you meet him, he's like at peak Tony Stark at the beginning of that first Iron Man film. Stark Industries is thriving and he has a partner who at the time was a good idea to be his partner. But it's so crazy to watch a character start as like an archetype and become a real person.
Well, I'm always a fan of, in comics and movies, watching the hero get taken down a few pegs, because if you're, and especially with Tony Stark at the start of these films, he's not the person you want to have saving your butt.
No, he's the opposite of the person. He only cares about himself.
And so knocking them down and kind of forcing them to confront their own flaws, whether or not they can overcome those, how do they evolve and grow past those? And I just love those stories where you kind of challenge whether or not this person is the hero, and Iron Man does that right from the get-go.
Yeah. And you know what's funny is we're looking at the Iron Man first, but also the big three. Thor does that too.
Oh, absolutely.
And then Captain America also does that, but in a different way than the other two. Because like Thor has to earn his place every day because of the spell that Odin put on his powers at first. Thor, we should do a MCU then and now Thor, because his evolution's great too. And then Cap, you see him as the person who's at the bottom and his rise to the top versus Tony Stark. So
because you don't want to see a guy like Cap get taken down.
No, because like what Civil War is such an important movie, even though it's labeled a Captain America movie, because that to me is the point where Tony and Cap are in the middle. That's where they have to meet head to head.
Yeah.
And because Tony has started from the top and brought himself down while Cap has built himself up.
Yeah. And I think that film especially shows like a really great point in Tony's evolution as a character in vulnerability after all the results of like Age of Ultron, which was kind of the most salient film preceding that one.
And in that one, if you watch Tony, he's kind of almost regressed back into his arrogant Tony ways.
Yeah. And so when we get to Civil War, you see he has kind of burst the bubble of his own egotism, and we get to see more guilt on the character influencing his choices and leading into this iconic comic storyline. And so it's interesting to see that he is at the point where he goes, okay, I thought the bubble was too big to burst, but here I am, and I have to figure out what I believe in and how my actions are going to affect more people, because for so much of the beginning films of him, he's like, look how cool I am and look what I can make, and isn't it great? And there's no consequences.
He goes from I am Iron Man, like at the end, to we need to be put in check. Like those two lines specifically, and having Robert Downey Jr. play them again, stroke of genius on the producers.
Lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, lightning in a bottle, absolutely. If you just put those lines up next to each other, it's the arrogance versus the humility, because that's Tony Stark admitting that when he says we need to be put in check, it's like, I don't have all the power. I can't do everything. We need we need more than just us. Like you just said, like the bubble got so big but it just burst.
Yeah. And for a character like that, I think to realize that he is a genius. Like he is fantastic. He's got the smarts and the abilities and the technology to make these things happen, but then to realize like, hey, that's not enough. That's not going to win the day every time. It was really cool. And Civil War, he got some really cool, deeper, more personal moments in that one as well.
Well, it advanced his story so much, but I want to take it back a couple steps to the first Avengers movie and the way he meets all the different characters and how the first time he meets Thor specifically, they go into like a godlike state of fighting that Cap has to break up. So as I mean, Kitty's known around the nerd culture that she's a huge Thor fan. So I just wanted to kind of pick your brain about that interaction between Tony and Thor. Two characters that are seemingly very similar. They come from privilege. They're taken down, and then what? Like I'm just curious as to your thoughts on the Tony Thor dynamic and Thor's place within the Avengers.
Well, first of all, Shakespeare in the Park, fantastic. Doth mother know you weareth her drapes, but and that's just the fact that Tony Stark can confront, and this was the first time a lot of these characters also encountered Thor, to be so irreverent in the face of a god. That's a great question. I think it's fun to see that, especially when Cap has to get in the mix, that these kind of titans of Marvel can hold their own against each other.
But that's the thing, is that Tony shouldn't be able to. Thor is an actual god.
Right.
So
Thor had also just spent a whole movie trying to learn humility, but when his brother jumps in the mix, a lot of that flies out the window. I mean, I think
triggered.
I think if the fight had gone long enough, I mean, it was
say it.
Thor would have won. It was very nice that his Iron Man armor could absorb some of the shock of Thor's lightning, but
that was, I thought, a really cool, unexpected use of to show how the technology, like how well Tony's tech works.
Because as much as I love Thor, how fun would it have been had Thor destroyed the people he was supposed to save the day with?
Right.
He didn't know it at the time, and he just thought they were enemies, but there has to be checks and balances for all these characters.
Absolutely. And to take that like a step further, we as the audience have to know that Tony Stark's, while his technology is of Earth, it could be useful against otherworldly creatures. And so that was a great, again, point in our audience just like visualizing, oh, this is a god who controls thunder and lightning, and like Iron Man can still hold up against him. That's interesting.
It is. And it's almost like the whole cinematic universe is connected, and there's greater points they're leading to.
I know. Oh my gosh.
But on the subject of technology, I mean, we can't talk about Iron Man and 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe without talking about how many Iron Man suits. I mean, we don't have to name, obviously, any or all of them, but it began with the Marvel Visual Development team. And,
oh my gosh.
And just the fact that with Ironmonger and then the prototype armor and Marks 1, 2, 3.
If there was any visual way to show Tony Stark's genius, like they did it. They nailed on the head how making that arc reactor inside a cave and putting it inside that prototype arm, the Mark 1, as it came to be called. But that is how you show that this character is more than his money and more than his privilege and more than his ego. It's like, no, he has the smarts to back it up. He took an arc reactor that's this huge thing in a plant. And he made it so it fits in his pocket.
Yeah. And I think one of the greater Marvel spectacles on the screen is just all the different Iron Man armors. I mean, there's so many, and yet they managed to keep them all so unique. And then there's the house party protocol where it all just goes out the window. Like, you want a green one? Sure, here's a green one. And here's the one that looks like a giant, like,
Igor.
Well, there's Igor. As they say. And then they introduced the Hulkbuster, which was
Veronica.
Oh, I love that reference.
I loved it too. It was so good.
And I just think it's such a testament to the development team and the digital artists and everyone who works on those films, just the amazing, all the way up through the bleeding edge inspired stuff that we just got. Like, it's so cool. And I think the Hulkbuster in Age of Ultron, if we can jump to that storyline.
Oh yeah,
I
absolutely.
think that's kind of between the first Avengers and then, even though Civil War was a Cap film, I think Age of Ultron was kind of a turning point where it was tipping the scales towards what ended up happening in Civil War.
For sure, because there was tech. Even, like, you know, Ultron is tech that has gone bad, you know?
And at this point, we're really starting to see, as we see the damages come off of the first Avengers film and stuff, we're seeing people turn their frustrations towards Tony Stark. Because as such an icon of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like, of course, his face is one of the more recognizable in world and in the real world. But to have, like, Wanda and Pietro, and to have a vendetta, and the people of Sokovia to react in fear when they see the Iron Legion, and just the ideas that even though he is this genius, like, there's repercussions to his work.
I want to put that in direct contrast to a character. Like, I know that you're the now and I'm the then, but
we can cross over.
But yeah, we're crossing over right now, because I cannot help but think, when you talk about, like, the people of Sokovia, fear of the Iron Legion, with great power comes great responsibility. And to have him mentor, like, the young Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and to have him teach Peter Parker, like, and have those moments where, like, if you are nothing without the suit, then you're not worthy of it. Tony would not have learned that without the events of Age of Ultron. Because, say what you want about, like, the structure of that movie, but when you are isolating Tony's storyline, and you're taking the Iron Legion, and you're taking Ultron, and you're taking Jarvis, and you're taking the creation of the Vision, you have so many different beats that happen in that movie that lead Tony to humility. Because what does he want? Like, he and Bruce are talking about, like, in that movie, they're talking about the next level, right? And that's like Bruce is trying to talk him down through most of that film.
Oh yeah.
And so Tony's just, like, getting up, and then, like, what's going to break him, and this is what happens.
And I think even before that, there's moments of, even in the cave, he didn't have a suit when he entered that cave, and even in the Avengers, when it's like, want to go round to round, like, put on the suit, or, like, what are you without the suit? And so I think tying that in with Spider-Man Homecoming was such a cool evolution, to have him as a character say, hey, like, if you can't do the heroic things without this piece of equipment, like,
you don't
that was the really verbose way of saying exactly what Tony said, but just such a great moment for him as a character. And I think it's such a privilege, honestly, that the Marvel movies have evolved so much from that first Iron Man, that we got Spider-Man Homecoming, and no spoilers, but to see his dynamic with some of the characters in Infinity War, namely your friend Doctor Strange.
Oh my God, that was
it's just, they've evolved so much to incorporate these other characters who can play off of him.
I'm gonna just do this thing where I'm just gonna ignore the then and now lines, but we talked about Thor being one of your favorite characters, and Doctor Strange is one of my favorite characters, and Tony Stark has such very different introductions to the two of them. Like, with Thor, he's like muscles and attack, and like tech versus muscles, essentially. And then Doctor Strange has, like, no fear of Tony whatsoever. He comes to get Tony. This is all in the trailer, so if you haven't seen the movie, like, hopefully you have by now, since it made $1 billion in 11 days. But if you have not, we will not spoil things for you. I will just say that the intro of Doctor Strange to Tony Stark is kind of one of the best things ever, because he does not give a darn about
family friendly.
Yes, family friendly about anything that Tony is. He's just like, I need your help. And Tony's like, what is your problem, essentially? And it takes him seeing a familiar face in order for him to actually listen to Strange. And both those characters aren't used to that. Doctor Strange is used to everyone listening to him, as is Tony Stark.
Well, and I think that speaks again to where the Marvel Cinematic Universe has evolved so much that we can start to get more of these different personality types and add a diversity to the roster. So yeah, we can throw in another ego type guy, because even in the comics, Tony and Doctor Strange have that ego and facial hair going on. That's just so much their dynamic.
Funny to me.
But I still love, regardless of throughout all these different films, just kind of that smarm that Tony meets most challenges with the nicknames and the funny, like, yeah, well, I'm Iron Man kind of like
Earth is closed today.
Or even like going back to the Avengers when it's like clench up Legolas,
yeah,
and like blah blah blah. Point Break, strongest Avenger.
Oh, that was one of my favorite moments in Ragnarok, when like they're trying to get the ship to turn on, and
obviously strongest Avenger.
Yeah, obviously strongest, and Thor has to like goes, damn it, Stark, Point Break. And then the ship just starts up.
Yeah, because he's got such a rapport with these characters by that
and
point.
I would like to point out that Tony Stark is not even in Thor Ragnarok, yet he is.
But his wardrobe is.
His tech is, his personality is. There's not a movie that you can't see his mark on. Like the
after credit scenes and
the Marvel Cinematic Universe started with Tony.
Yeah,
it started with
simple
Tony.
as that.
Yeah, it was their benchmark film. It was. Is that what I'm trying to say? I don't know what I'm trying to say. It was like the film that it was their jumping off point. If Iron Man had failed back in 2008, we wouldn't have seen our favorites on screen.
I mean, Marvel Studios now, looking back on 10 years, almost feels a little bit like Tony. They started, not literally, but in a cave with this one piece of equipment.
They put all their like eggs in that basket.
Yes, and it's like
one shot.
Will it fly? And 10 years later, 19 movies with Infinity War. Yeah. 19 films later, it's like, oh my god!
I can't. It was funny when Doctor Strange came out. I actually like had this weird crying moment before. I'm sitting in the theater before the movie started, and I just started crying because I could not believe because he's such a weird character. And how would this film have ever been funded if Iron Man hadn't been successful? It never would have been funded.
It's mind-blowing to look back on 10 years, because MCU Iron Man is so wholly integrated into every inch of the MCU. Just the farthest reaches.
And there's just this point in Civil War when Rhodey falls, and it was kind of a crazy moment, because you just go, oh my gosh, this is the same day that Doctor Strange got into his car accident. and it's a crazy thing to think about, but that's how integrated these films are, and you can't have an MCU without Tony Stark.
No, not in the least.
So if MCU fans are looking to follow the evolution of Iron Man across the decade, hopefully more, what are some of your favorites? Like we always give a list at the end of comics to pick up.
Obviously, your guys' list is just rewatch all the Marvel Cinematic, but
rewatch the first Iron Man. Do yourself a favor and rewatch the first Iron Man,
and just think about how nothing else was the context for that film. It happened, and look where it is now. I mean, I love his role in Homecoming. I think that was a stroke
of genius right there.
And I know people have opinions about every Marvel movie, but for the most part, I really liked Iron Man 2 for things that it introduced.
That's funny, because for people have opinions about MCU movies, but I enjoyed Iron Man 3.
Yeah, I think for things that it introduced, some of its concepts don't quite get off the ground, but God,
I would love to see Sam Rockwell back.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. And they did that funny. Marvel needs to bring back those shorts, like those, because they did the one for the Mandarin.
Yeah.
Hail to the King. And so the things, whether or not everyone loves every part of every movie, there's such a wealth of material to be used. And I love Sir, Please Exit the Donut.
And there's like a take what you like and leave the rest kind of policy with it, because even I know a lot of people have opinions about Age of Ultron, but there's a lot of good in there in spite of what others say. So if you're looking for beats in Tony's MCU life, you can't skip Age of Ultron, because the failure of Ultron affected Tony in ways moving forward that
it affected so many characters in that film.
Mm-hmm. So,
and make sure you see Infinity War. I mean, if you haven't already, please.
Yeah, if you're like the one person listening to this who haven't seen Infinity War.
Please stay to the end of our podcast and then get thyself to a theater.
Oh my gosh, she just spoke like Thor. I can't believe
it's
she did
Shakespeare in the Park.
Oh my gosh.
All right.
I was like, I should say a Doctor Strange line, except that most of his lines are inappropriate for this podcast. So we believe that Iron Man still has a lot more of a role to play in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but we won't see what's next for him until Avengers 4 arrives in 2019.
That's a long way off.
I know. I really wanted them to do like a Cloverfield thing and just drop the movie like the next week. Like, how cool would that have been?
Or after the credits.
Or after the credits, just the fourth one starts. Huh? Yeah?
I think everyone would have stayed in the theater for that.
I think so too. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Iron Man, Then and Now. This has been Then and Now. For more ad-free pop culture news and content, visit geeksideshow.com. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to let your geek side show.